certainty as to the intent, as to what the consequences of those amendments will be. Because the danger, as my right honourable friend, the former Chief Whip, the member for the Forest of Dean, pointed out, they will act in essence as a Trojan horse against the intention that was pointed out. So I don't for a minute doubt the member for West Dorset when he says changing standing orders has precedent. Of course it does. But there's been no debate with the Procedure Committee. There's been no debate in this House to look at this. And the wider constitutional implications that have been referred to by leading experts in this field cannot simply be swept away in the short-term convenience of the moment. The amendment from my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden, again is one put forward with great principle. But she spoke of a simple vote on saying no to no deal. And the issue was really taken head on by the member for Belfast North when he pointed out the practical effect of taking no deal off the table does not facilitate that intention, and I absolutely agree with the right honourable gentleman in that regard. And indeed it's not just on the DUP benches that view is held. Michael Barnier himself said on the 24th of January, it is not enough to vote against the no deal if no positive suggestions are put on the table, then we will be more or less bumpy or heading for the no deal on March 30th as in an accident. So the way that no deal is addressed is indeed by backing the deal of my right honourable touch on the amendments from the member for Beaconsfield and the member for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford, because again both of them in their remarks, and I don't for a minute question the principle and spirit in which those amendments don't for a minute doubt the member for West Dorset when he says changing standing orders has precedent. Of course it does. But there's been no debate with the Procedure Committee. There's been no debate in this House to look at this. And the wider constitutional implications that have been referred to by leading experts in this field cannot simply be swept away in the short-term convenience of the moment. The amendment from my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden, again is one put forward with great principle. But she spoke of a simple vote on saying no to no deal. And the issue was really taken head-on by the member for Belfast North when he pointed out the practical effect of taking no deal off the table does not facilitate that intention. And I absolutely agree with the right honourable gentleman in that regard. And indeed, it's not just on the DUP benches that that view is held. Michael Barnier himself said on the 24th of January, it is not enough to vote against the no deal. If no positive suggestions are put on the table, then we will be more or less bumpy or heading for the no deal on March 30th as in an accident. So the way that no deal is addressed is indeed by backing the deal of my right honourable friend. I know there has been much discussion on the proposal of the honourable member for North West Hampshire. And although it's not an amendment on the order paper today, it has given us many technical questions to consider, and we will seek the experts' views on this as we take this forward. But what is clear is that the spirit of goodwill on which that builds is one we will take forward as part of reaching the common ground that we need as a House. Of course I will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've waited very, very, very patiently, but I've run out of patience. I would like the Secretary of State for leaving the EU to explain to this House what exactly the alternative arrangements are. It's a straightforward question, and we are entitled to a straightforward answer.
So this will be part of the negotiation, and we will discuss in terms of the technical issues. But what is not in doubt, and it is a commitment shared by the Honourable Lady when indeed she has criticised those on the benches opposite who, unlike the sister parties of the Labour movement in Northern Ireland, have not backed this deal, who have not reflected the will both of the Labour movement in the south and also that in the north. The fact is that they have walked away from the deal, even though the deal is the way of securing that, because the Prime Minister is clear, whatever is agreed, our steadfast commitment to ensuring that no hard border returns to Northern Ireland is a commitment my right honourable friend repeated today, and is one on which she is steadfast. Given that I've got just a minute left, Mr. Speaker, across Leave and Remain constituencies, Mr. Speaker, we hear the same overwhelming call for this House to get on with it. 17.4 million people did not vote for no deal, but they did vote to leave. Time is of the essence. Citizens and business want certainty. The EU wants clarity. The Prime Minister needs a mandate, and the House must therefore come together. It's time to act in the national interest. That is why the House should back the amendment from the member for Sale and Altrincham West.
I call the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, to move Amendment A, which stands in his name.
I so move, Mr. Speaker, Amendment A.
The question is that the Amendment A, be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby!
break of trust and view it in very dim light.
OK. John, let's just go through these amendments then. Right. We've got Jeremy Corbyn's been voted on now, which intriguingly also touches on, well, is it for the first time from the front bench of the Labour Party on the issue of a second referendum?
Leaving the option open, which of course was the policy they passed at the conference in September in Liverpool. Yeah. However, in recent days, we have seen leading figures in the shadow cabinet. First, we had Ian Lavery, the party chairman. Then, on Sophie Ridge on Sunday at the weekend, we had Angela Rayner, the shadow education secretary, who was very hostile to the idea of a second referendum. We know that Mr Corbyn doesn't favour that. Labour is very split on that. We know all the very vocal backbenchers. We know who they are, the Chuka-Amunas, all those people who support the so-called people's vote. They make a lot of noise, but I'm not sure they've got the numbers in the Labour Party, and certainly those senior shadow cabinet ministers are not keen on it.
So, Tom Swarbrick, we've got to just talk through the what-ifs, assuming that because this is kind of party political, this is put forward by Jeremy Corbyn, this one goes down. Which ones do you think could make it beyond the Brady amendment?
Well, I think Nicky's right to be worried about the Cooper amendment until it falls. The worry is that it could gain enough votes to pass. I do wonder though what signal does it send if the Brady amendment passes by 3 votes, 4 votes, 5 votes, 10 votes?
Does it cancel out the 230 that voted?
Is it enough of a majority, a mandate, to really start to say to the EU, actually, we can definitely get a vote through if you're able to make changes to the withdrawal agreement?
But doesn't that go back to what you were saying, Isabel? I'm just keeping an eye there on what's happening in the House of Commons there. Once the tellers line up there in front of the Speaker, we'll know that the announcements of the result will be imminent. But, the European Union's always been saying, tell us what you want. Well, even if it is only by 2 or 3 votes, well, isn't this Parliament finally saying, well, yeah, there is a slim majority for this?
Yeah, except it's still rather vague. It's still just alternative arrangements. So, yeah, very tricky.
Yeah, we heard some interventions right at the end there in the Steve Barclay speech, didn't we? I think the tellers are almost there.
Here we go, let's have a
lot of questions.
The ayes to the right, 296. The noes to the left, 327.
The ayes to the right, 296. The noes to the left, 327. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. We now come to Amendment O. In the name of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, Mr Ian Blackford, the Right Honourable Gentleman to move his Amendment O formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that the Amendment O, be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby.
There you heard the Speaker. More voting taking place there. You heard the Speaker, John Bercow, moving down to the second of 7 amendments being voted on this evening. This one put forward by the SNP leader in the House, Ian Blackford, requires the government to ask for Article 50 to be extended and demands Scotland not to be taken out of the EU, given that it voted to remain. And just to underline what you've just seen occurring on your screens there, a Labour amendment from the Labour leader, from Jeremy Corbyn, requiring the government to allow time for Parliament to debate and vote on options to prevent a no-deal Brexit, including a customs union and a second referendum, defeated there by a majority of 31. So more or less along party lines there, but a few more on the no column than the Conservatives can muster on their own. Quick thought from John Craig.
I'm not sure if Labour are supporting this. I'm just looking at the Labour benches there.
The SNP motion.
The second one, yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember now what Mr Corbyn said about which ones they were going to support.
Okay.
I think there were some Labour MPs will probably back it, but I'm not sure if the front benches.
Okay, but still likely not to get through.
Oh, get trounced.
I think they said they would abstain.
Yes, I think they're going to abstain.
All right. Well, I want to check in the heart of the Palace of Westminster in Central Lobby there, our Deputy Political Editor, Beth Rigby. And so that Labour motion, rather as expected, that Labour amendment defeated.
Yeah, that's right, Dermot. But look, the amendment people are really watching, which is the cross-party amendment backed by Nick Bowles of the Conservatives, but then led really by Yvette Cooper, the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, is of course this amendment which calls on Article 50 to be extended if by the end of February the Prime Minister hasn't got a deal. That's the one people are watching to see if it will pass. And I've just bumped into Lisa Nandy, the MP for Wigan, and she has told me that she will reluctantly back that amendment. She said her condition is that the extension of Article 50 is limited to 3 months. Of course, she is an MP on the Labour benches who's in a heavily leave constituency, in a heavily leave area, so she's uncomfortable with this amendment. She will back it. But I have to say, on my Conservative side, my Conservative sources are suggesting to me that they don't think this amendment will go through, that actually the party is, as John was saying earlier, coalescing now around the Brady Amendment. So my latest intelligence is that the Conservatives think that the Brady Amendment will pass, that the Caroline Spellman amendment will pass, which rules out a no deal but doesn't really box the Prime Minister in any which way. They think that will pass. And then the Nick Bowles, Yvette Cooper amendment, that one's right in the balance. That one's crucial, because if that does pass, that will be Parliament trying to take back control of the Brexit process from the Prime Minister and putting it in the hands of MPs. If that passes, that will be electric. But as it looks at the moment, the Prime Minister, I think, quietly confident that the Brady Amendment will pass, that the Eurosceptic Brexiteers in her party are backing it for now. I have to say, Dermot, they will say this is a victory, but it's a Pyrrhic one at best, isn't it? The only reason we're redebating, let's never forget this, is the Prime Minister lost the vote on her Brexit deal by 230 votes earlier this month. And now she's had to rip up what she said she wouldn't do, which is her original plan that the withdrawal agreement would be closed. It was done and dusted. She's now saying, actually, I'm going to reopen that to try and get her MPs through the voting lobbies with her and her government. If she gets it through, expect her to go back to Brussels maybe next week to try and renegotiate with the EU 27, who very emphatically said they are not reopening this legal treaty, this withdrawal agreement. Back channels in number 10 are telling me that they're getting a bit more positive noise from Brussels, but we await to see, because publicly they are not giving her much at all.
OK, Beth, thanks very much indeed for the update and the intelligence. And just let me take you through what's happening now. As Beth alluded to, a second of 7 amendments being voted on now. One down already. That's the Labour amendment from Jeremy Corbyn. This one tabled by the SNP, asking for, amongst other things, Scotland not to be taken out of the EU, given that it voted to remain. The key amendments that all eyes are on, that Beth was talking about there, one of them is 2 votes away, Amendment B, funnily enough, but they don't come in alphabetical order. That's the one, the Cooper-Bowles Amendment, as it's been called, requiring the government to allow parliamentary time to pass a new law that would seek to postpone Brexit until as far as the 31st of December, if the Commons has not approved their deal by the 26th of February. And that one in the balance is the feeling at the moment. And then the last 2 on the order paper, again, worth paying an awful lot of attention to. And, you know, we will be one tabled by Dame Caroline Spellman and Jack Dromey, which states the MPs reject leaving the EU without a deal, but it doesn't legally compel the government to act accordingly. And lastly, one that the government is supporting, and we've heard this evening the European Research Group, that faction within the Conservative Party, saying they'll support as well, requiring the backstop to be replaced with alternative arrangements, whatever they may be, and therefore would give the Prime Minister perhaps some more ammunition to go back to the European Union and maybe change that withdrawal agreement. Let me ask you about that then, Isabel Oakeshott. I mean, does it have to be the reopening of the withdrawal agreement? There's talk about legally binding codicils, addendums,
and all of that. Well,
but I mean, from the ERG's point of view, from every one of them I've talked to for many months now, it's that withdrawal agreement has to be reopened, and the backstop has to be taken out and something else put in.
They're absolutely not going to be reassured by anything that they would categorise as warm words, and warm words is pretty much anything that doesn't involve open heart surgery on this deal. So really very difficult difficult. I also wanted to make a point about the Cooper Amendment, which now we get the sense that this is probably going to fall, this attempt to extend Article 50. I can't imagine, though, that if this falls tonight, that push to extend Article 50 will just somehow go away. You know, we must not underestimate the sheer forces that are aligned to try to put off Brexit, and there will be many more, I suspect, attempts to do that before we get anywhere near March the 29th.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, they could come from many quarters, depending, you know, if the Prime Minister, if they do reopen negotiations, they could come from the European Union.
And also Conservative ministers threatening to resign if no deal becomes a genuine option, and which is why I think for the European Research Group, the move tonight is strategically the right one for them to back this Brady Amendment, because you don't have to look very far to see the anger in the House of Commons at no deal as being a possibility. And for anyone who felt that voting the Prime Minister's deal down, there was then a very smooth path to no deal, has been proven emphatically wrong, because there isn't.
And you made the point earlier about positions sort of becoming more entrenched, and I think there is a real disconnect between what many voters feel in terms of no deal and the mood of the House, which is very clearly, absolutely will not contemplate no deal. And yet there is a shift in the mood in the country, certainly within the Leave contingent, that actually no deal is much more palatable than many MPs feel.
I just want to, just on that, I mean, just underline for our viewers, Nikki da Costa, because that is, as we're always saying, the default position. The law has been passed on that, on leaving the European Union, deal or no deal.
Absolutely. It's in the EU Withdrawal Act. Exit day is there. Yes, ministers have the power to change exit day should the process change. So they already have this power. They don't need it to be given to them by Cooper. But the Prime Minister's made very clear we're leaving, and that's all the legislation for that is there in terms of the bare basics. I think what you've seen, and that the change is because of the movement by the Speaker and by Dominic Grieve, which has changed the government's control, which is taking control of the standing orders, meant that actually there is now this genuine threat that legislation could be foisted on the government to override that legislation. And that's why you're seeing this funneling and this facing up to that in the last 24 hours. And, you know, I would be saying to MPs, you know, this is something to be really worried about. As somebody, you know, I have never been so worried that the government was about to have powers taken away from them.
OK, I just want to check in with our editor-at-large, Adam Bolton. He's in Downing Street as we wait for the result of this vote, the SNP's amendment. And Adam, your sense of what's going to happen with perhaps the more significant amendments?
Well, I slightly disagree with the tone of your panel's discussion. I do think the move by the ERG is significant, but I don't think it's necessarily a triumphant one for them, especially if, as Beth Rigby was saying, there's a possibility that the Spellman Amendment calling for a ruling out of no deal is passed. I mean, what is the calculation of the European Research Group? Presumably, they are coming on board with the Prime Minister, which is very significant, given, of course, their stance 2 weeks ago. They are hoping that she will be able to go back to Brussels and get something. She expects she's going to get something, but is she going to get anything like the open heart surgery Isabel was talking about? Absolutely not. I think the European Union are quite clear that this is an agreement, remember, which the Prime Minister agreed to, and the paraphernalia of opening that up in the next 59 days is not there. Indeed, when I was talking to Robert Buckland, the Solicitor General, who was involved in developing this possible next move, the compromise, he was absolutely clear that he did not expect any opening up of the withdrawal agreement itself. It will be warm language alongside that. Now, what does that mean for this ERG group? At one level, they could accept that. They could say, we helped the Prime Minister put the pressure on, we've got these guarantees, and that's fine. At the other level, if they say they're going to reject it, then they could be a step closer to getting a no-deal Brexit, because more time would have been wasted. And also in the blame game for that, they would be shifting it towards Brussels. They would be saying, oh, it's beastly Brussels, didn't give us what we want, it's not our fault that we're going to crash out. So there's quite a lot of politics involved in all this, and it'll be interesting to see the next amendment they're going to vote on after this SNP one is going to be the Grieve Amendment. We haven't talked much about that. That is basically creating parliamentary time right into March for Parliament to still be debating the options and have indicative votes. And, you know, let's remember that the government has already lost control of this process. It didn't want to be here. It didn't want to be having consultations with Parliament, even to this degree. So, you know, there is, I think, rather more in play, although I come back to the fact that they could well end up fighting themselves to the standstill. As far as that Brady Agreement, Brady Amendment number N is concerned at the end of this voting process, that clearly now is going to depend on the traffic between the two parties. How many Labour people tacitly or emphatically, by crossing the other way, back that, and how many Conservatives sit on their hands or vote against it. That's really going to depend whether there's a narrow majority or a narrow minority for that. So I don't think the play's over on that, although when we have seen confrontations like this in the past, the number of Labour defectors has been enough to save the day for Mrs May. So, I do generally think the thing is much more fluid, except I disagree that there's going to be a dramatic breakthrough with Brussels.
OK, Adam, we've got the results on this second amendment.
Ayes to the right were 39. The noes to the left were 327.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 39. The noes to the left, 327. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. We now come to Amendment G. In the name of the Right Honourable and learned gentleman, the member for Beaconsfield, Mr Dominic Grieve. Next to move. I'm grateful to the Right Honourable and learned gentleman for moving his amendment formally. The question is that Amendment G be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby!
Well, so much happening now. Another vote taking place on another amendment, this one from the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, proposing a series of debates on a weekly basis throughout the course of the rest of this Parliament, right up to almost to Brexit departure day on March the 29th, seeking the views, really, of what the House actually wants. Should just reflect on that amendment that's fallen so very heavily. This one put by the Scottish National Party, as you can see there, just on the numbers, an awful lot of abstentions there in the House of Commons, and just 39 votes in favour, just about 4 more than the SNP can muster. A majority, therefore, of 288. John Craig, really quickly.
I can explain that. Labour abstained. 39 is just the SNP and Plaid Cymru.
OK.
35 and 4.
Thanks, John. Right, I've got Jacob Rees-Mogg waiting for me. He's just about to go and vote on that amendment, I believe, Chairman of the ERG. Very good to talk to you, Mr Rees-Mogg. So talk us through the ERG's agreement now to support Theresa May, to support the government on Sir Graham Brady's amendment.
We will support Sir Graham's amendment because it's become de facto a government amendment, and the government has agreed to reopen the withdrawal agreement to try and get rid of the backstop, which we don't think works and doesn't take us out of the European Union. It's agreed that there will be a further vote and that the Brady Amendment doesn't approve the withdrawal agreement. And perhaps most interestingly, the Kit Malthouse compromise is something the government is now taking on board very seriously. So for those 3 reasons, we are willing to back the government and try and give them the mandate that it needs to go to Brussels and say the backstop must go.
But when you voted against the withdrawal agreement, you and I spoke, and it was much more than the backstop that concerned you, and you don't want to see that revisited then?
Well, you're absolutely right. In the end, all negotiations have a compromise, and the key thing is that we achieve Brexit. You will notice a lot of amendments down tonight, particularly Yvette Cooper's amendment, seek effectively to stop Brexit. They seek to overturn the result of 17.4 million people. I want the reverse. I want Brexit to be delivered, and if that means some compromises have to be made, then that is something it's rational to do. But the backstop meant that we didn't get Brexit. Everything else that I object to in the withdrawal agreement runs out. It's time limited. The backstop wasn't.
OK, well, can you give us Your thoughts on what the alternative arrangements might be, even if the EU would agree to them?
Well, these were set out in a paper published in December called A Better Plan, which was primarily done by the ERG and friends to set out how you would have an arrangement that is customary under international trade terms between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland that could have smooth trade without a hard physical border. So that's the document that I would refer you to.
I did look at that when it came out. And forgive me if I'm misquoting you, or it might have been Mr. Baker I spoke to. He said you've been advised by experts on that.
Well, I don't think I said that. I'm very coy about using the word experts because
you've avoided it, but I've heard it from others.
Have you? Well, you can't hold me responsible for what everybody else has said. The experts get an awful lot wrong, but that this is according to international norms, according to international law, and is perfectly workable. You must forgive me, I need to go and vote against Mr. Greaves' dangerous and peculiarly unconstitutional amendment. So, with my apologies to your viewers, I have that again.
Indeed,
Thank
Mr.
you so
Rees-Mogg.
much.
OK, we appreciate you spending the time. Perhaps you come back to talk to us after that vote, or certainly after a few more. Courteous as ever in that put down from Mr. Rees-Mogg. Well, let's talk about this Grieve amendment. And in actual fact, I know you want to reflect on what our editor-at-large was saying, Adam Bolton was saying about you getting overexcited, Isabel Oakeshott.
I don't think he did say that, actually. No, I think he slightly misinterpreted possibly what we collectively as a panel did. I was struck by Jacob Rees-Mogg's words there about getting Brexit over the line. This, of course, has been what Number 10 has been privately saying to the hardline Brexiteers. Let's just stagger over March the 29th, and then if you want something a bit better, then we can try and get that later on, because this is just the withdrawal agreement after all. So there will be those in Number 10 tonight who are delighted to hear that somebody as influential and hardline, supposedly Brexiteer, as Jacob Rees-Mogg, is now taking that position that he is willing to compromise just to get Brexit over the line. It's a big shift, that.
Running down the clock is working then?
Well, as we've discussed before, it's been clear now that the path to no deal is not going to be as easy as some thought it was. And as Jacob
do you think that's what he'd prefer?
Well, I think the original plan was if the deal falls, you go to no deal. That's what the legislation says. And actually, as much as people would like to see the EU soften their position, I think the European Research Group has come to the conclusion that they perhaps have to soften too. And that process has taken, you've seen it happen over a number of weeks. There was a column that Jacob Rees-Mogg wrote in the Mail on Sunday a few weeks ago that made that point, that we've got to get this over the line. And if it is just a case of just falling over the line with something that looks like Brexit, then and if the ERG can be pleased with that, then go for it.
OK, Nicky de Costa, let's concentrate on this amendment that's been voted on now, termed as dangerous and unconstitutional by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Just talk us through it and why he might have that interpretation.
So I think the summary that you provided earlier presented it as a little bit innocuous. You know, it's just 6 more debates, 6 more moments when Parliament can come together. Well, what it is, remember the kernels of where this came from. Grieve came out and he was sort of busted in a expose by, I think, Alex Wickham from BuzzFeed, and basically saying that what he was going to do is, on each of those 6 days, grab control of the order paper. And what we would see with these 6 opportunities is 6 more opportunities for things like the Yvette Cooper amendment to come forward, 6 more opportunities. It could be for a second referendum, it could be to say extend, to try and put legal compulsion behind just a resolution. So I think what I'm always saying is watch for those policy-neutral vehicles, which are essentially Trojan horses, on which you can now put very extraordinary amendments as a result of the Speaker's willingness to consider things previously unthinkable.
But the unconstitutional bit that Jacob Rees-Mogg referred to, I mean, you know, if Parliament's voted for it, does that make it unconstitutional?
So I think you have to go back into where you think where the balance of power is, and I would also note this, you know, when people say it's about, you have different schools of thought. Where does the executive derive its legitimacy? In who can the people hold to account? If the government is held to account, it can elect them or you can kick them out of office. That's the key principle. But if actually it's about, we won't kick out the government, we won't trigger a general election, we won't take responsibility for that, but we will compel the government to take particular actions, then it starts to be very difficult to hold those individual people to account other than via their constituencies. And that's why I think you have people say this is unconstitutional, because basically Dominic Grieve isn't willing to take that step of saying I will actually vote against the government. He's trying to find a fudge.
John Craig, what did you make of Jacob Rees-Mogg there? He seems to be softening the tone, falling into line even.
What I was going to say a moment ago when Isabel made a point about, I think about the ERG and no deal, after the meeting they had last night, some of them all came out and were parroting, if you like, no, not parroting, sounds a bit unfair, trumpeting, if you like, their slogan, no deal is better than a bad deal. There are some of them who still believe that. And so, yes, I can see why Mr. Rees-Mogg doesn't like I'm just looking at the Dominic Grieve amendment. Debates on the 12th and 26th of February, 5th, 12th, 19th and 26th of March. I think a lot of people go, oh.
26th of March?
Yeah, that's
wow.
close, isn't it, to the deadline, yes. I think it's messy, isn't it, really, this one? And I think I'm not convinced that... I mean, there's a lot, if you look at who's supporting it, a lot of SNP, Lib Dem and Labour Remainers, but I'm not... I think the Cooper one is the more interesting
one. And that's coming after this one. But let's just talk about this last amendment, the fact that it's now been supported by the ERG. I mean, that could be very temporary indeed if Theresa May goes and says reopen the withdrawal agreement and comes back with a flea in her ear from Brussels.
Well, and presumably there will have been discussions taking place between senior people in the government and the ERG as to exactly what they feel these alternative arrangements could look like that would carry weight with them, because the worst thing would be if the Prime Minister is able to get something from the European Union, which looks vastly unlikely, and the European Research Group say it's not enough for us. So there needs to be a bit of coordination about what that might look like before then going to the European Union and kind of asking for it. Where we will be if the European Union say absolutely no way are we going to change this, we're headlong into a proper crisis then, I think.
Well, the results of this amendment could have a very big bearing on how those discussions, which no doubt will take place, even if the Brady amendment is not passed, this would be Parliament very much taking back control.
Well, absolutely, and it is the one that Downing Street fears the most. And yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't look like it's going to get through, but you can't be completely sure. And Dominic Grieve has had a wide following. It was interesting to see today some splits emerging within the Remainers in the Tory party. Anna Soubry, one of the most prominent Remainer Tories, quite annoyed with Nicky Morgan, who's been sort of doing some cross-party negotiations in secret. And I thought that was quite a significant new split on the Remainer side.
OK, well, thank you all very much indeed for the time being. While we keep an eye on what's going on in the House of Commons, can now talk to someone who doesn't have to leave me to go and vote, because it's Baroness Angela Smith, of course, Labour leader in the House of Lords. Very good to talk to you, Baroness Smith. You have highest hopes this evening, having seen, I know, Jeremy Corbyn's amendment defeated on the one proposed by, amongst others, Yvette Cooper.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry, I know it's very noisy around there. I want to talk to you about the prospects of Yvette Cooper's amendment, which is going to be voted on after this one. Your sense of how that will go.
It's really hard to tell. I have to say, I think the Grieve one they're voting on at the moment, that would be extraordinary if that was passed, but it would indicate the frustration that's felt with the government at the moment. On the Yvette Cooper one, which is not just Yvette Cooper, it's supported by MPs from across all parties, it's really hard to tell at this stage. What it does, there's been some misinformation about it, what it really does is just press the pause button and buy some time to avoid crashing out with no deal, or indeed have some kind of hard Brexit. And I think it's just really trying to, the Prime Minister should have really, I think, accept it. Let's just have a look at this, have a limited bit more time. Otherwise, if the Prime Minister insists it's her deal or no deal, the country's going to be in a terrible state. As we've seen from reports over the weekend about the stockpiling of food, for example, we should never be in that position.
Well, the Prime Minister, though, I mean, wasn't it significant? The Prime Minister has rather changed her tune, well, a little bit today. It's not her deal or no deal. It's a different version of her deal. What do you see the prospects of her getting any change out of the European Union?
It's a different deal, maybe, isn't it? And I find it quite extraordinary, again, that she's put this forward, because the reason the backstop is there is because they couldn't find any other alternative arrangements to stop a hard border in Northern Ireland. Now she's backing an amendment that says we can get rid of the backstop if we have alternative arrangements, but no one can say what they are. So I don't think this is really a serious negotiating issue with the EU. It's more the Prime Minister negotiating with her own party to try and bring a few more on board to see if she can reduce the opposition to the deal that she's done. But it's really hard to see how this issue, which the EU has told her is not open for further discussion, can come back again. Here's the result.
Baroness Smith, sorry to leave you. We've got the results on this third amendment.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 301. The noes to the left, 321. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. We now come to Amendment B, in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford, Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper, to move the amendment formally. Thank you. The question is that Amendment B be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby.
And you're getting very familiar with this if you've been staying with us throughout the course of the evening. The parliamentary procedure led by the Speaker, John Burke, there. And I'm glad to say Baroness Smith has stayed with us, the Labour leader in the House of Lords. I believe after I rather had to cut you off at the knees there, Baroness Smith, just to get that result in. I know you sit in the other place, but how significant do you judge that to be then, the government holding off on that Grieve amendment?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I would have expected on the Grieve amendment. It would have been quite extraordinary had it won, but it does indicate, I don't know who's voted how yet, but it indicates to me that the government is buying off some of its hardline Brexit supporters to try and get them behind Theresa May's deal. Now, that was an opportunity for MPs to debate it a bit more, but I think the Cooper amendment is probably the most interesting one here, because what that could do is provide time to sort of press the pause button to avoid crashing out of the EU without a deal. So what happens next will really indicate whether the Prime Minister has been able to persuade the hardline Brexit supporters that they should support her.
Well, let me ask you about that. You said it twice now, pressing the pause button, buying a bit more time. Well, a lot of time has been wasted, some say almost deliberately by the government. What would that do but, lead to more time wasting, just run the clock down again, which seems to be, from Theresa May's point of view, seems to be being slightly effective when it comes to the European Research Group.
It does, but whether that will hold, as we heard earlier from Jacob Rees-Mogg and others, I'm not sure that will hold for too long. But you're quite right. The reason why we're running out of time and we're at this stage so late in the day is because sort of really the way the Prime Minister has handled the negotiations. She first told us we'd have an agreement back in October. We had Liam Fox telling us how easy everything was going to be. And in fact, the reason that there hasn't been agreement on so many areas is not because people haven't been trying to get an agreement. It's just because the Prime Minister really went into negotiations with one arm tied behind her back because she set the red lines, which made a really sensible deal for the UK unachievable.
OK, Baroness Smith, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, Baroness Angela
Thanks,
Smith. Labour leader in the House of Lords. There's MPs filing out of the House of Commons to vote on this highly significant amendment. You may have heard me discussing it there with Baroness Smith and Yvette Cooper and others, Nick Bowles and others from across the benches there supporting this amendment, proposing this amendment that requires the government to allow parliamentary time to pass a new law. And this is the only amendment tonight that would require a law to be passed that seeks to postpone Brexit until the 31st of December of this year if the Commons has not approved their deal by the 26th of February. This could really put, Isabel Oakeshott, really could put a big stick through the Prime Minister's spokes.
A big stick through the Conservative Party's spokes. I have to say that it would be catastrophic, I think, for the Conservative Party. And what we've seen in terms of the behaviour of the ERG, this group of supposedly hardline Brexiteers, they are now facing a brutal reality, which is which do they fear and object to more? The prospect of a Corbyn government, a Labour administration, or the prospect of an imperfect Brexit? And when push comes to shove, their conclusion privately is that they are more worried about the Corbyn. I keep saying Gordon. I keep wanting to say Gordon Brown. It's getting a long night.
Well, the last Labour Prime Minister.
They are more worried about that, and they calculate that they can play a longer game if they absolutely have to, and they will move on after what they would see as a suboptimal Brexit towards wondering about how they can shape the future trading arrangements and whether they can, in fact, put in place a new Prime Minister which is a more true Brexiteer into number 10.
And so, I mean, is this vote all about the crossing of the benches? How many Labour votes the government's way, and how many of the soft Brexiteers, if I can call them that, on the Conservative side, vote for the amendment?
I think it will be, but I was interested in the way in which the Baroness there was describing the effect of the amendment, and it was very softly done. You know, it's just a way of pressing the pause button. This is all very soft. I'm afraid you could smell the rubber from the spin of the tyres there. It was spinning so much. I mean, as Nikki has pointed out, there are Trojan horses everywhere here, and I think this is one of them.
Can I just talk about the numbers here, because that last one on the Grieve amendment was 301 to 321, government majority of 20. That suggests that they're probably not quite the numbers for the Cooper amendment to pass, even if there's a few more Tories supporting it. I suspect that because the government's won that one quite comfortably, they will just about see off the Cooper one.
OK. And Nikki, why is this more of a Trojan horse than just a slight pause for Parliament to reconsider different ways?
I think two things. First of all, it's about taking both the time that you need to pass legislation, then passing the legislation. And we know that they would have to do it at least one more time, probably because of ping pong. In addition, there is a clause in Yvette Cooper's bill, and it's worth looking at the amendment plus the bill that's going to be marched in on the back of that amendment, which basically says that the government must comply with any amendment that is passed on the 26th of February. Now, you can see a situation where MPs might say, oh, well, by the 26th of February, I might get a majority for a second referendum, or I might be able to do X. So it's a wonderful thing that those that wish to frustrate Brexit can go, oh, I quite like the look of that clause. Nobody's really talking about that clause, but it's in there.
Wow. Tom?
I mean, that's absolutely right. It's a blank sheet of paper, isn't it, upon which anyone can write anything that they have a majority for, whether it's not leaving without with no deal, whether it's a second referendum, whatever it might be. And that is a real danger. And that danger may become very, very real if this gets voted through in the next few minutes.
But are we getting a sense here, because, I mean, it's getting more polarised, that, you know, they're splitting down party lines now?
Well, I think we go back to this failed attempt to have the cross-party talks, and the bottom line is that the Conservatives just simply didn't trust Labour to come on board for anything other than, well, in fact, even if Theresa May had been able to offer membership of the single market and the customs union, there was a feeling that she couldn't offer that anyway within her own party, that Labour probably would have found a reason not to back that either. So there's a complete breakdown of trust there. There never was any trust, so that was always doomed.
The word trust is really important there, actually, because part of the problem with the Cooper Amendment and the response to it is the trust in just delaying Brexit, when actually, as has been explained, there are bits in there that would do more than that. So trust in all directions between Conservative MPs and the government, between the government and the opposition and the opposition internally, has completely broken down.
And the lesson that I learned, in number 10 when we were taking the bill through, is that failure to think ahead as to exactly how could somebody use it. Maybe it makes you cynical, and you may be completely wrong. But if you fail to think about what could happen,
you've got to do it.
What might you build on that, then you usually end up in quite a sticky situation.
And John Craig, I just want to use this time available to talk about an amendment that actually isn't on the paper, but it's been alluded to, it's been talked about a couple of times now, the Malthouse.
Oh, that.
Yes, well, that may...
Great title, isn't it, the Malthouse? It sounds like a title of a spy novel or something like that. Kit Malthouse, big burly guy, used to be Deputy Leader of Westminster City Council, now a Housing Minister, has managed to get Leavers and Remainers to come together.
In secret talks?
Yes, fairly secret anyway.
Oh, you knew about it?
Well, they were fairly secret, and I noticed, I saw him last night in the Commons, and I thought he was looking a bit furtive.
Shifty.
And it was only this morning, of course, that I read what he'd been up to. But it's building on the Brady Amendment, and it is trying to... You can probably explain it better than me what it's trying to do, but it's another fudge, another compromise. When I interviewed Sir Graham Brady last night, he was talking about compromise, and I said to him, yeah, but compromise has been terribly difficult to find. And it looks as though if you can bring together Nicky Morgan and also some of the Brexiteers, then, although, as you mentioned, there was a clash in the chamber, I think it was today, between Nicky Morgan and Anna Soubry.
Yeah. Anna Soubry saying she hadn't been told about it.
Coming together. Can I just say, it is being reported or suggested that Cooper will fail, but Spellman may pass.
OK, well, we better explain that then, just to people. So, I mean,
I think
feel free, Isabel.
Spellman is the one which is ruling out no deal, but not making that legally binding on the government. So it's a symbolic thing, demonstrating the will of the House against no deal, but the government, in theory, is free to ignore it.
Well, let's speculate then, so Spellman, a kind of weaker version of Cooper. My goodness me, we are getting technical. But what happens if that and the Graham Brady Amendment passes? Theresa May goes to Brussels. Isn't she going to say, well, you've in effect taken no deal off the table? This has weakened my negotiating position.
Yes, I mean, the Prime Minister has always had that up her sleeve, really. The fact that you won't get your £39 billion, all that sort of stuff, if we leave with no deal. Of course, Brexiteers, as I was saying a moment ago, came out of that meeting last night, and they want no deal because of the £39 billion. We've heard David Davis, Boris Johnson, all sorts of leading Brexiteers talk about this. So, yes, the Prime Minister will not want, although Caroline Spellman, former party chairman, former cabinet minister, seen as a loyalist, no doubt she's trying to be helpful. But I think she's teamed up with Jack Dromey, two Birmingham MPs worried about the car industry in the Midlands. And I think there is the majority of MPs probably don't want no deal.
Well, I mean, isn't it widely thought, Tom Swarbrick, that the Prime Minister, I mean, she can't articulate it, but the Prime Minister doesn't want no deal?
I think there are, and I would have to admit to it myself, holding a slightly inherently hypocritical position of not wanting of not thinking that no deal would ever be a good thing, and actually that it would be very, very difficult if it were to happen, but at the same time thinking removing it as an option would be pretty catastrophic for any negotiations, and that is a really difficult line to have to tread and balancing act to have to perform. But it's the principle of no deal versus the reality of it, and the principle of having it there as a negotiating tactic, I think, has to happen on the basis that what are you going to negotiate with if it's removed?
But certainly the European Union, Isabel Oakeshott, I mean, they believe that the Prime Minister really, if the push comes to shove, would not countenance no deal.
No, and let's be clear that if this Spellman Amendment went through, it doesn't take no deal off the table. No deal actually is the table. That still is the default position. All it tells us is something that we really almost all knew already, which is that MPs don't like that idea.
Okay, just to update people, if you are just joining us on what you're watching, it's another night of highly significant voting taking place in the House of Commons. I think you can tell that by the number of MPs that are in attendance. Not enough space on the benches for them all to sit down, many of them preferring to stand anyway because they've just come in from the voting lobbies. Now, this is a highly significant amendment to Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act 2018, tabled by, amongst others, Yvette Cooper, former Labour Cabinet Minister, and saying that the government must allow parliamentary time to pass a new law that would seek to postpone Brexit until the 31st of December if the Commons has not approved her deal by the 26th of February. You can see the tellers. These are the MPs who are delegated to count the number of MPs. It's all terribly old-fashioned. It's all done by head count. They will file through those lobbies to the side of the chamber itself, and they've assembled in front of the Speaker's chair. We'll get the result.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 321.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 321. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. We now come to Amendment J in the name of the Honourable Lady the Member for Leeds Central, Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves to move the amendment formally.
Formally.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment J be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division, clear the lobby.
And so back they go for the fifth time this evening. Two more amendments after that to come. This one tabled by Labour's Rachel Reeves, asking the government to seek an extension to Article 50 if a deal hasn't passed in the House of Commons by the 26th of February. So let's get reaction from our editor at large, Adam Bolton, on the defeats of Yvette Cooper and others' amendment. Adam.
Well, I mean, things, it has to be said, so far this evening are going Mrs May's way, strangely enough. It would have been problematic for her if either the Grieve Amendment or the Cooper Amendment had passed. That has not taken place. I think all the eyes now are going to be on the question of the Brady Amendment at the end of the evening, but bearing in mind that Mrs May has said that she backs that, even if that's carried, that won't be classed as a defeat. I come back to this basic point that the other thing that's happened this evening, and I know you're going to be talking to Chukwuemeka in just a moment, is that the idea of a people's vote, a second referendum, simply hasn't been at the races. Indeed, it was noticeable that the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, wouldn't let the MP, Angela Smith, not the Baroness Angela Smith, intervene on him, although he had other interventions, precisely because she is known to be one of those in favour of the so-called people's vote. So that has fallen by the wayside, always a threat to Mrs May. Looks as if the mood of the House is moving against no deal. Looks as if the ERG, however grudgingly, with however many threats about what they may do in the future, are beginning to fall into line. So, you know, just remember, it's been written off an awful lot of times, but it looks right now, the way these votes are going, that Mrs May's deal is still the most lively thing around.
As I know you won't say it, Adam, as you've been predicting for quite some time. Thank you very much indeed. Our editor-at-large, Adam Bolton, there, just keeping an eye on developments in the House of Commons. Well, let's go just outside the House, outside the chamber, the Parliament Central Lobby. Our deputy political editor, Beth Rigby, is there to get some reaction to how the night's gone so far from the former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab. Beth.
Yes, that's right, Dermot. I've got Dom Raab here, who quit Cabinet, as you remember, in opposition, if you like, to Theresa May's deal, and he's with me now. So, Mr. Raab, thanks for joining us. She's having quite a good night, isn't she?
It's too early to call it a triumph yet, but two things are happening. The first is the Prime Minister came with a set of reassurances that she intends to go back to Brussels to address some of the flaws in the first deal, which, as you'll recall, was voted down by a historic margin, around 230 votes. And I think the second thing is happening, which is, as well as MPs rowing in to support that so that she can go to Brussels with a strengthened hand, it's very focused demands of the EU. The other amendments and the sort of very colourful options to try and reopen the negotiations, start from scratch, if you like, with different models, the Pandora's box, have been voted down so far. And I think it's good news for those that want Brexit delivered, but it's a good night for the government as well, so far.
Must be a bit stinging for you personally, isn't it? I mean, you were forced to quit Cabinet because you wanted her to go and renegotiate the backstop and she simply refused. It must be personally a bit irritating for you, isn't it, that suddenly she's changed her mind?
Well, I think Parliament spoke, resoundingly clear. I don't take any great pleasure of being vindicated in the judgment call I made. I think the more important thing is that actually the government and the Prime Minister, who I always said I still respect, is now set on a course that can deliver a deal. And now we need to test the goodwill of the EU, and if they respond in kind with these, frankly, eminently reasonable changes we need, we've got a chance of getting this through, getting a deal, and leaving with a deal on the 29th of March.
And you told Sophie Ridge in her show recently, when you came on to Sky News, that Michel Barnier had given you verbal reassurances that he thought the backstop could be finite, that it didn't have to be in perpetuity. So you've always been quite confident, are you, that they would renegotiate on the backstop?
Well, I think it's a question of political choice for the EU, just as we make choices here. And I think last week it was that Barnier publicly said, even in the event of no deal, they would put the operational arrangements in place to avoid a return to a hard border. So it's not a question of whether they can do it, it's a question of whether they want to do it. And I think if push comes to shove, and it's very clear we need this discrete, focused change in order to get a deal, that will focus minds in Brussels too. But it's a question of political choice. They've got to want a deal too.
And Mr. Raab, the other thing you said to Sophie, which fascinated me, was that you felt that you needed a new negotiating team in Brussels. You obviously were right up at the coalface with all of this. Who would you like out of the negotiating team, and who do you think should be put in?
Well, it's not really about the personal side, but what we've got in a situation with an endgame of a very tight negotiation is there need to be political control. And I think it needs to be at the political level, which supplements but also drives and has accountability and oversight over the great work the civil servants are doing. But this needs to be a political deal that is politically closed. It needs that agility, it needs that flexibility, and frankly, it needs that political clout.
And who should be negotiating that?
Well, it needs to be a senior member of the Cabinet, preferably the Secretary of State for Brexit or someone else. But that's, Theresa May picks her team, and I've always respected that. But I think the key thing is that you need political control, political direction. And I'm going to have to scram or I'm going to miss a vote.
I'm just going to ask you one more thing quickly. Just in terms of the process of doing this, obviously this would need to be ratified by European Council. When could that happen? Is there time to do all of this, or do you think we might have to extend Article 50 even if for a couple of weeks?
No, I think there's time, but with all these things, the EU is a very wily and canny negotiator, and when there's a will, there's a way. And I think what we're showing them today is that Parliament would back a deal with these focus changes so that we weren't locked in to a whole regime where we've got no control over the laws, from customs rules to social policy to tax, and that's crucially important, and I'm going to have to dash.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Raab. So there you have it, Dermot. That is, sorry, I'm caught up in my wires. That's quite a happy Brexiteer, isn't it? And why? Well, because Theresa May, having suffered that historic defeat, has clearly decided that she needs somehow to try and get her deal through on the back of Conservative and DUP votes. And if the Brady Amendment goes through, it's another lifeline for her to go back to Brussels to try to renegotiate her deal further. Whether Brussels will open the door, that's still to be seen, but she will see that as a victory this evening. We're waiting that Brady Amendment.
Here we are indeed. OK, Beth, thank you very much indeed. Lucky Dominic Raab didn't trip over your wires there. He might not have made it into to vote on this amendment, one from Labour's Rachel Reeves, looking at delaying Article 50. Well, let me just talk you through how the evening's gone so far. And as our editor-at-large, Adam Bolton, was saying, going Theresa May and the government's way so far this evening. 7 amendments being voted on this evening in the House of Commons, 4 with the results so far, and all 4 have been defeated, including 2 very tricky ones for the government. One from the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, seeking to table a series of debates in the House of Commons over the next couple of months, and one by Yvette Cooper and others, looking at a legal postponement of Article 50. Well, and on that one, I just want to get quickly analysis from John Craig, our chief political correspondent, and you've been crunching the numbers as much as you can on that, and it seems, in spite of the fact that the Labour front bench was supporting that quite a lot of Labour MPs didn't vote for it.
No, it's being suggested that there were 12 Labour MPs who voted against the Yvette Cooper amendment. Mr Corbyn said that Labour were backing it, but clearly what looks like has happened is that those if not necessarily pro-Brexit, those MPs in pro-Brexit constituencies who did not want to support this, because of course one thinks of Ruth Smeeth in Stoke-on-Trent, one thinks of, I don't know about Caroline Flint, I'm merely speculating here, but some of those northern Labour MPs who are worried about their constituency, who voted heavily for leave. It looks as though 12 of them plus abstentions, and that's why Yvette Cooper. It's also being suggested that Mr Corbyn made a dud speech, and that's why some Labour MPs didn't vote for it, and the Labour MPs are still cross about the shambles of them failing to oppose the immigration bill.
Just on those numbers, that would have been wafer thin then. And if the 12 that you think
gone the other way
voted for the government on 321, take that away, that becomes 309, 298 plus 12 is 310.
Yeah,
Cooper would have got through.
Yes.
Going to be quite a lot of recriminations, one imagines. On
well, clearly,
side.
yes. I mean, there are a lot of recriminations. I mean, we touched on the annoyance of Angela Smith MP as opposed to Baroness Smith. She was trying over and over again to try and intervene on Mr Corbyn today. He wouldn't take her. I mean, we shouldn't underestimate the rancour that there is between those around Mr Corbyn and some of his backbenchers. We've seen it. We saw it during the course of the debate today. Look, the Labour benches look packed there now. But at one point, all the Corbynistas, they weren't in the chamber. It was what I call the shadow cabinet. The Yvette Coopers, the Hilary Benns, Rachel Reeves, all the people who sit towards the back of the chamber were the ones who were in their places. They're the ones who are really taking part in this debate, who care about this. You get the impression that a lot of those around Mr Corbyn don't care about it that much. OK,
John, thank you very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshott, do you share that feeling? Well, the numbers speak for themselves, that it's rather going Theresa May's way tonight.
Well, and those are words we haven't been able to utter for many months.
For many months, indeed, maybe years.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to keep this in perspective. It just allows her to stagger on. She lives to fight another day, as Theresa May almost always seems to, however big the blow that's delivered to her. This is not where they wanted to be, number 10, but at the moment it looks as if the Brady Amendment has every prospect of getting through, and that gives her what she's appealed for, which is the strengthened hand to go back to Brussels and ask for more.
And Tom Swarbrick, while you're still with us, I know you've got to go. What just your overall sense of how it's gone so far?
I think Isabel's put it quite well. I mean, they will be pleased if and when Brady gets passed in number 10 that it's gone the way it's gone so far this evening. But in the context of where we find ourselves, overall, it's clearly very tricky. And if we fast forward 2 weeks' time and the European Union still aren't moving and the backstop still hasn't been reopened and the open heart surgery hasn't taken place, where does number 10 go from there? Where does the Prime Minister then seek another mandate from to try and get the changes that she needs? OK, well, we'll say goodbye to you, Tom, and thank you very much indeed for your time. And glad to say Dr Hannah White has just joined as Deputy Director of the Institute for Government. Very good evening to you, Dr White. No doubt you've been following these developments very, very closely indeed. And in a sense, we are getting the options whittled down, aren't we? It's getting closer and closer to Theresa May's deal. It may have to be a change deal, but
it's still on the table.
Well, certainly, as Tom was saying, I think this seems to be going the way she would have hoped today. What we've seen is the two sort of procedural backbench amendments, the one by Dominic Grieve and the one from Yvette Cooper, which were trying to provide opportunities for Parliament to debate different options or to extend the time limit for Article 50 so that could happen. Those have been voted down. I mean, I would say that, you know, Theresa May perhaps succeeded in, and those who spoke on her behalf today succeeded in persuading people that this wasn't necessarily the last opportunity to extend Article 50, I think. So potentially, you know, if in a couple of weeks' time, as we say, the EU hasn't budged, maybe MPs will have another go then.
Stay with us, Dr. White. I'm joined now by Chukwuemeka, Labour's Chukwuemeka, I think, joins me from Central Lobby. There you are. Very good evening to you, Mr. Emuna. I mean, it just doesn't seem to be going your way, does it?
Well, I'm deeply, deeply disappointed about this result. The Yvette Cooper amendment and the Dominic Grieve amendment, both of those amendments sought to empower Parliament to legally provide against us leaving the European Union without a deal. And all the economic research, the government's own research, shows that if we leave the European Union without a deal, it will do immense damage to our economy, immense damage to the prospects of my constituents. And by voting against these two amendments, it has robbed Parliament of the opportunity, the wide canvas, to give us to work with to prevent that no deal from happening. And we've got a government which has basically been taken hostage by the right wing of the Conservative Party that is quite happy for that scenario potentially occurring. And that's why I'm really angry about this, because in the end this is about people's jobs and their livelihoods. And all we were trying to do from the backbenches here was try to ensure that we have the legal means.
Mr. Muller, stay with us. Let's get the result on this one.
The ayes to the right, 290. The noes to the left, 322. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Well, we now come to Amendment I, in the name of the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Meriden, Dame Caroline Spelman. Right Honourable Lady, to move the amendment formally?
Formally.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment I be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby!
Well, Mr. Emuna is still with us. I know you've got to go and vote in this one in a minute or two, but your gloom must just have deepened.
Well, the only way to stop this country crashing out of the European Union, certainly in the short term, to stop us from crashing out of the European Union without a deal, is to get an extension to Article 50. Now, the motion that's just been defeated didn't even have any legal teeth. This was a political motion to signal that Parliament didn't want to leave the European Union without a deal. And even then, people were not supporting this very reasonable amendment, again, designed to protect people's jobs, their livelihoods, to ensure that younger generations watching this programme get the same opportunity, the same privileges as older people. So I'm afraid, yeah, we've lost this as well, and it is a bad day for Parliament. And I think one of the most distasteful things I have witnessed throughout the course of today is listening to Conservative MPs talking about the need to do these votes according to needs of reunifying the Conservative Party, not the needs of your viewers, not the needs of our country. You are seeing their party being put before the country, and that is wrong in my view.
OK, I just want to ask you about the next amendment that I know you've got to go and vote on. Judging from the number of MPs who are still in the chamber, I can tell you've still got a bit of time. So let me put this to you. If this one goes down, the Caroline Spelman and Jack Dromey amendment trying to stop leaving without a deal. If this one falls, is that your sense now that no deal is a very distinct possibility?
Yes. Straight answer to a straight question. If people are going to keep voting against motions designed to stop this country from crashing out of the European Union with no deal, if they're going to vote against motions and potentially legal motions as well with teeth, then that is definitely now more of a possibility than it was at the start of today. And that is deeply worrying indeed.
But what about the last amendment, Sir Graham Brady's one on going back to the European Union, looking for alternative arrangements? Now, if that succeeds, it might not be no deal. Could be the withdrawal agreement, an amended withdrawal agreement.
Well, the problem is, and sorry, I'm just looking at what's going on in the chamber because I really ought to run and vote, but the problem with that is reopening the withdrawal agreement is something the EU have said they won't do. And so if they're not going to play ball with the Brady Amendment, we are staring down the barrel at leaving the European Union without a deal. That's the truth of the matter. Truth of the matter. And personally, I think it's disgraceful. I think this should be referred back to the people, really, because this is the only way that we should be determining our destiny when we've got such a divided parliament and a divided country.
OK, appreciate your time, Mr. Ramon. I know you've got to go and vote. Thank you very much indeed for spending the time to talk to us here on Sky News. More reaction from my panellists. Changing members of it, joined now by Ben Maskell, former head of strategic communications for Theresa May. And, well, we saw Chuka Umunna saying straight answers he was giving me, saying that, well, he's getting more gloomy from his point of view. You know, he wants the second referendum. It's looking more and more distant.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's moved against that faction tonight, and it looks to be moving towards number 10 in the government. I think that, look, they'll clearly take it in their stride. They've been through too many bad times to get overexcited yet. We haven't seen what will happen with the Brady Amendment. But fundamentally, the basic test of all these things is if you were offered these outcomes in advance, would you take them? And clearly they would have done. I think that the slightly bigger question now, and we'll see that unfold if the Brady Amendment passes and the PM does go back to Brussels, is that whether it's kind of ends up being a Pyrrhic victory because what the government ended up ceding to the Brexiteers or where it ended up going was just too much for Brussels to stomach.
I mean, Chuka Umunna making the point there, many others have, Isabel Oakeshott. Party before country. Theresa May's more interested in holding that
it's a false dichotomy,
coalition of interest together.
It's a false dichotomy because I think many Conservatives would think that they are putting the country first when they do everything to avoid a Labour administration. I thought that was quite an extraordinary kind of broadside from Chuka Umunna there. He's a very measured MP, normally very smooth, very articulate. Boy, is he angry tonight. And I think that a lot of Brexit supporting MPs and Brexit voters up and down the country might take quite a lot of heart from the tone of Chuka Umunna's intervention on Sky just there, because he sounds quite defeated actually. And it seems to me that, you know, you might have expected him to come on tonight and be quite bullish. This is an MP who has campaigned so wholeheartedly for a second referendum, the so-called people's vote, and he's acting tonight as if all that has crashed into ruins and it will be no chance of that happening. And there will be a lot of people up and down the country who voted for Brexit who will be relieved to hear that Chuka Umunna and the People's Vote campaign has kind of crashed and burned tonight.
John Craig.
Do you know why I think he's angry? I think he's angry at the Labour leadership rather than the Conservative Party. Reading between the lines, he didn't say it. I think he's angry because of the fact that a number of Labour MPs have voted against their party, a number of them have abstained, and I suspect that, as we're hearing, that a lot of Labour MPs are very critical of Mr Corbyn's, A, his speech, and B, his leadership.
But Mr Corbyn did put the weight of the front bench behind that Cooper Amendment.
Yes, but I think clearly he didn't persuade the whole... I mean, we talk party discipline. The Tory discipline seems to be holding better than the Labour discipline tonight, doesn't it, given that they haven't squeaked home by single figures in any of these votes yet. They're winning them by margins of 20 or 30. And it's because Labour MPs, some of them are abstaining, some are voting against their party. And it's another occasion when Labour's had a chance to inflict a defeat on the government, and because they've not all either voted or some have voted against, they haven't.
Well, I mean, Hannah, what do you think? Why is that happening within the Conservative Party? I mean, we've seen these divisions out in the open for so many months now, but they seem to be coming back together again. But they still don't agree.
They don't, but I think last night this last-minute compromise, which seems to have been cooked up between some of the Remainers like Nicky Morgan, and some
which isn't even being voted on, we should say, but it's there in the background.
It's there in the background, and I think that the argument has come through today that the Brady Amendment could facilitate that sort of answer. Now, that is certainly an answer to possibly, as we've seen today, bringing more unity to the Conservative Party. But as Ben was saying, it's not necessarily an answer to actually how to do Brexit if the EU just won't budge.
Well, that's the point, though, isn't it? I mean, is this all taking place yet again, let's use that word, in a bubble, Ben Maskell, you know, in the Westminster bubble, and sitting there in Brussels, they're saying, how many times do we have to tell you the withdrawal agreement is not being revisited?
No, there's a different proposition now because there is a clear...
we're expecting,
we're hoping, on the basis that the Brady Amendment is passed, it is a different situation because the PM can then go to Brussels and say this is what there is a majority for. As I've said, whether that's too much for Brussels to take, we'll find out. But it sort of always struck me when I was working in government that actually the backstop and the Northern Ireland border issue was there as an iceberg so far out, and it was always the problem, and you know, resignations and rows and hundreds of pages of legal text have passed, but actually it's all boiled down to that one issue. And I think what we find out is where there's two competing theories. One is that it's an intractable problem and there is no way around it because it's an insurance policy, and the other is that at 5 to midnight Brussels will move on things, and one of those things will turn out
to be true. That's a real game of chicken, though, isn't it? And been played in juggernauts.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course the fact that the Cooper Amendment has not passed is helpful because if the PM was going with both, but without that sort of threat of no deal, it would be, whether it would be more dangerous for the country, it would be strategically a bit incoherent for her and would lose her leverage.
But Isabel Oakeshott, I mean, we are in this curious position, aren't we, of the Prime Minister who's so long argued for this withdrawal agreement. And I always remember, you know, that speech from Michael Gove when he summed up in the last debate, talking about the backstop being great. It was this bowl of cherries. When you didn't have to pay into the EU, you had all the advantages of the EU, and the EU didn't like it, so we should. But suddenly she doesn't like it.
And we've gone full circle here, really, haven't we? And I wanted to return to the analysis about why the Tory party may suddenly becoming more unified than it was before. And I think it comes down to the sheer horror of the idea of a Labour administration. This isn't the normal horror of a governing party wondering about being replaced by an opposition. Sometimes governing parties can actually get their head round that. They can, you know, accept that it might be good for them to be in opposition for a while. But I think the Tory party see the prospect of a Corbyn administration as an existential crisis for this country, and therefore everything has to come ahead of that.
OK, just to bring people up to speed who are just joining us, two key amendments still to be voted on in the House of Commons this evening. 5 have already fallen. This one that MPs are voting on at the moment from Dame Caroline Spelman and Jack Droby on the Labour side, asking that MPs reject leaving the EU without a deal, but it doesn't compel the government to act accordingly. After that, the one that's seen as having most hope of passing, Sir Graham Brady's amendment. They're asking the Prime Minister to go back and negotiate alternative arrangements with Europe. But, well, the votes tonight have been having an effect on the markets, so let's find out how with our economics editor, Ed Conway. Ed, what's been happening?
Yeah, thanks, Dermot. And, you know, we heard from Chucko Romana just a moment ago, clearly showing some disappointment that the Cooper-Bowles amendment had been defeated. And it's worth just looking how the market reacted. Lots of people in the market betting on the pound, deciding whether to invest in the UK. And that has been moving this currency around. And it's a pretty good barometer for just how investors view the UK in the future. Generally speaking, getting stronger when people think that there is likely to be more of a soft Brexit, getting weaker when they think it's going to be harder. That's how it's been throughout the course of the day. So it's just looking, starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's been relatively steady over that period. But what happened when that amendment, the Cooper-Bowles amendment, was defeated? Of course, it fell very sharply. In fact, this is one of the biggest falls that we've seen for a while. It's not totally enormous, but a big fall nonetheless, suggesting markets are watching this. It'll be very interesting to see how they respond to the Brady amendment as well.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's have a look at the result from the last amendment before the Brady amendment. This is the Spellman-Dromey amendment. I'm sure you're familiar with them all now. This is the last hope of Chuka Umunna anyway, and his side of the argument, rejecting leaving the EU without a deal, but it has no legal compulsion on the government, but nevertheless would be a shot across Theresa May's bows, who, as you know, has always wanted to keep no deal on the table. She's saying if that was taken away, it would crucially affect her negotiations with the European Union if and when she heads back to Brussels to look for some changes to the withdrawal agreement, particularly on that issue of the Northern Ireland, of the Irish backstop. So we are waiting there, just the tellers. These are the MPs who are picked to do the counting on both sides of the House. We wait for them. 4 of them will assemble in front of the Mace there, in front of the Speaker's chair, and we'll get the results on this one. And last thought just before that happens was we watched that Hawk-like with John Craig. And John, I mean, given the way the previous votes have gone, does this one, some people thought this one had more of a chance?
This had a boost from yesterday, a letter from the British Retail Consortium to all MPs. I interviewed Jack Dromey about it actually last night, and of course there were dire warnings of increases in food prices at the supermarkets and so on. So that will have boosted the chances of this going through. Can I bring you a bit of amusing bit of colour from the Commons?
Any time.
Journalists are reporting that to the tune of Lord of the Dance, a senior cabinet minister dances through on the way to voting lobbies with a playful song, "Vote, vote, whoever you may be, vote, vote, vote with the DUP."
Care to name any names?
No, I don't have the names.
If only we had footage of this, yes. That would make it much more entertaining.
It was outside the chamber. So I think they're gathering now. The Speaker's back in his chair, so let's listen in.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 318. The noes to the left, 310.
The ayes to the right, 318. The noes to the left, 310. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. Order. We now come to Amendment N in the name of the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, Sir Graham Brady, to move formally.
Formally, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment N be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby.
Right, well, this muddies the waters. Let's get reaction to the results of the vote on that amendment. The yeses, those supporting the amendment, 318 against 310, a majority of 8 taking no deal off the table, of course, without legal power. Isabel Oakeshott, as they muddies the waters,
well,
does it?
It's not helpful for Theresa May, because there has been this symbolic vote by Parliament to say, actually, we're determined to leave with a deal come what may. And many Brexit supporters think that that is a ridiculous position to take and is bound to undermine her negotiating position. But the key point here is that is not legally binding on the Prime Minister. It is a presentational thing, a little bit unhelpful for her, but doesn't really change anything.
Is it more than that, Ben Maskell? A little bit unhelpful? I mean, it just shows that there's no majority for it in the House.
I think it's as you described, it's a shot across the bows. It doesn't carry force, and the PM, if the Brady Amendment passes, can still go showing what has a majority in terms of a plan to take forward. I guess the calculation Brussels will be making is when they decide whether to accept what's on the table or reopen the talks, is whether, if they don't, a softer Brexit is a possibility. And this does remind them that ultimately Parliament really doesn't like it and could find a way in the future, but it's not in itself a way.
That's interesting. I mean, your analysis on it, Hannah White, I mean, does it then mean that there's something that hasn't been discussed? If the withdrawal agreement isn't amended, does it mean that there's something else that will have to go through or be considered?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think in some ways this doesn't tell us anything we didn't already know. We'd seen amendments to the trade bill in the past where, you know, it was quite clear that there wasn't a majority, and we proved there wasn't a majority for no deal in Parliament. I mean, but as Ben says, what Brussels may take away from this is that as we get closer to the deadline, if there is no deal agreed, that actually MPs in the end, the same MPs who've just voted for that amendment, may come together to vote for an extension to Article 50 at the very least, to try to find more time for another deal to be agreed. And as Ben says, that might be a soft Brexit.
Yeah, we really are in a loop, aren't we here? So the MPs that don't want no deal, then might just be left with Theresa May's deal.
Well, that was kind of the point.
That was the thinking, wasn't it, all along?
I mean, I don't think you can credit it as being a master plan, but I do remember there was a great.
There is no master plan.
There is never a master plan in government, but I do remember a really good, memorable, sort of unnamed government source quote from towards the end of last year, where they were kind of wearily relaying the discussions they would have to try and persuade the Brexiteers that actually, if they don't go with a deal, something softer would ensue. And the phrase was that the logic bullets just keep bouncing off, and I think now there is a sense that those bullets are starting to get through a bit as you get nearer, and you can see not exactly a roadmap to blocking no deal, but you can kind of see where one might come from.
OK, let's talk to our editor-at-large, Adam Bolton. Adam, help us here. What's your thinking on this? If there's no majority for no deal, no majority at the moment for the withdrawal agreement, does this kind of box Theresa May in when she goes back to Brussels?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of game theory about this. I mean, my personal view is that I don't think the Prime Minister will be very bothered by this. I mean, remember Nick Timothy, her Brexiteer former Chief of Staff, wrote recently in the Daily Telegraph that it is not in the Prime Minister's nature to allow Britain out without a no deal. And similarly, of course, we know that way back when Mrs May was a Remainer. She wants a deal, and therefore what we are seeing, I agree with your last speaker there, we're seeing a certain amount of logic beginning to assert itself. What I wonder, though, is now that the final vote will be on the motion as amended, whether there will be a vote on that, and whether, particularly if the Brady Amendment doesn't get through, we might actually see an attempt by the European Research Group to defeat the Prime Minister's motion, albeit that it was a motion in neutral terms, so it wouldn't be binding on her. But that would mean that obviously would be a bit of an embarrassment. And even if the Brady motion does go through, bearing in mind that it's the ERG and the hard Brexiteers who've been talking up the no deal, the fact that Parliament's now expressed its will against it will make things more difficult for them. I do think that what we are seeing this evening, however, is one way, by these exhaustive votes, Parliament moving more towards the position that really the only deal on offer is the one that was agreed between the EU and the UK government back in December of last year. And that, I think, was an important indicative vote, if I can use that phrase, which has been used technically. And it does suggest that if it came to the crunch, there simply wouldn't be a majority in Parliament to endorse leaving with no deal.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Parliament's central lobby, just outside the Chamber of the House of Commons. There, our deputy political editor, Beth Rigby, is there, getting more reaction to tonight's developments. Beth.
Yes, hi Dermot. I'm here with Tobias Elwood, who is a minister and also a Remainer. And Mr. Elwood, thanks for joining us. What do you make of the fact that the Spellman amendment has passed, but the Cooper amendment was defeated?
Well, firstly, it's a reflection today on the fact the Prime Minister wanted to allow Parliament to speak, to gain an understanding of if there was a consensus. And clearly the House has spoken and said that we do not want to depart the EU without a deal. The interesting amendment for me is the next one, is the Brady Amendment, which actually says the same thing as the Spellman Amendment, because it says that we must leave with a deal, but it also tasks the Prime Minister to go back to Brussels to say there is an issue with the backstop and must work with the EU to try and change the problems with the backstop and then return back to Parliament itself. So that, for me, is the crux. That's the big one for tonight. The Spellman one simply confirmed, I think, what we all knew.
Yeah.
That we don't want to leave
and if I bring that, I mean, it feels tonight at the moment that Theresa May is having a better evening, shall we say, than when we last discussed the meaningful vote here in the House of Commons. But in terms of no deal, if that became government policy, if she can't come back on February the 13th with some sort of deal or movement, can you stay on as a minister?
Well, let's do one step at a time. As I say, the view of the House and of many people is that it would not be wise for Britain, on many reasons, to leave without a deal. And the House has now spoken. But the way that we avoid that is by securing a deal, supporting the Prime Minister and what she's actually put forward. There's been one big issue that we all know to do with the Northern Ireland backstop, or what happens with that long-term arrangement. Now, if the Brady Amendment goes through, it actually mandates her. She then has the power of not just government, but Parliament itself to return to the EU. And that's where I hope the EU will be minded to say, we recognise the challenges you've got. We will then look at that part of the withdrawal agreement.
But Mr. Howard, you're on the side of the party, if you like, that you want her to rule out a no deal. You would probably like an extension of Article 50 even in the event of us moving towards a no deal. But it seems that the Prime Minister is paying attention to her Brexiteers and the Brexiteer wing of the party. Do you feel like you are being a bit ignored in all of this?
Not at all. As I just said, the amendment for me that's critical this evening is the next amendment that we're going to vote on, because it will mean we must leave with a deal. That's what the Brady Amendment says, and it tackles the Northern Ireland issue as well. And that's the one the government is supporting. But ultimately, I can just say that Parliament was given the opportunity by the Prime Minister to express its views, and that's the democratic process that we've actually gone through this evening.
But she for months has been saying that she can't reopen the withdrawal agreement. That's the legal treaty that that we exit the EU with. She said she can't reopen it. It's not doable, not possible. They won't do it. They won't do it. They won't do it. They won't do it. And then suddenly, she's going to reopen the withdrawal agreement. I mean, this is for the birds, isn't it?
Not at all. I mean, this shows you the difficulties, the dilemma that any Prime Minister would face. We're in a minority government. We happen to be with a coalition with the one party that happens to represent the land border with the EU. We're dealing with an age-old question that over decades as to what is our relationship with the EU, trying to answer a referendum question where there wasn't clarity on what exit really meant. So put all that together, she's had to put forward the withdrawal agreement. We realise this is one aspect of it. Of course, she didn't want to go back to open it all up because it's been signed off by 27 countries. But this is where we are, and that's what she will now have to do.
And just on the issue of timing on this, she refused twice in the Commons when Mrs Cooper asked her about extending Article 50. Do you think that the Prime Minister can get this through in time? Because she has to go back, renegotiate it. If she can get a deal, she's going to have another European Council to get it signed off again. Yeah. How likely do you think it is that Article 50 will have to be extended?
Well, the point of having to extend Article 50 is because we're running out of time. Yeah. And that is focusing everybody's minds, including the Brexiteers, the very people that wanted this project in the first place.
But what's your honest assessment of whether it has to be extended or not?
Well, let's one step at a time. We want to land the deal. I hope it doesn't have to happen because, as you say, it takes us into uncertainty, takes us away from the referendum result itself. We need all colleagues right across the House to recognise the benefits of supporting the Prime Minister's deal so we avoid any requirement for an extension of Article 50.
And just finally, I don't want to push you too hard on this because I know it's one step ahead, but do you think the Prime Minister understands that there are some Remainer ministers in her government that will not be able to stay in government in the event of her moving policy to no deal?
Can I just challenge this term, Remainer, that the media love to use? I voted Remain in the referendum. I supported the Prime Minister, as did many ministers and many backbenchers who voted Remain, but supported a Brexit deal. The people that actually challenged her with that Brexit deal were the Brexiteers themselves, and they're now waking up to recognise if they want a deal, if they want to land something which is in our party manifesto, they need to start supporting the Prime Minister.
But just to be clear, do you think she is aware that there are some ministers that can't feel they cannot serve in her government if government policy becomes a no-deal Brexit?
I'm hoping that we can avoid that, but yes, many ministers have expressed their absolute concerns about the consequences of no deal. But it's mandated. This is where we go to if nothing happens. If we all stop what we're doing and wait to the 30th of March, that's legally where we end up. So we have to do that contingency planning. But ultimately, everybody is now leaning far more towards securing a deal.
And just finally, if you had to put odds on Article 50 being extended, do you think it's more than 50% now or less than 50%?
I think from today, and you touched on it yourself, that this has actually been a good day for the Prime Minister. She's allowed Parliament to express its views, made it very clear where it's going to go. She will hopefully get that mandate to return back to the EU. And I do hope the EU itself, which has been quite fixed in the ecosystem it's protecting, to be a little bit more flexible in what it has to offer, so we avoid the need to extend Article 50.
Thanks so much, Mr. Elwood. Thanks for your time. So there you have it, Dermot. Mr. Elwood supporting the Prime Minister, but I don't know about what you thought, he's pretty clear as well that Remainers or ministers that did vote Remain are very emphatically clear to the Prime Minister that they will not support a no-deal Brexit, and she must get this deal through. Back to you.
OK, Beth, thank you very much indeed, and that was made clear by the House in the results on the last amendment by Caroline Spellman and Jack Droney, rejecting leaving the EU without a deal. This, though, perhaps the most significant one of the evening, the last vote on the amendments. You can see for yourself what the House is dividing on. The House supports the withdrawal agreement if the backstop is replaced with an alternative, with alternative arrangements. And this one, of course, has got the support. Late this evening, it emerged the support of the European Research Group. They said, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, they said they would support this amendment if the Prime Minister goes back to Brussels and firms up what those alternative arrangements to the Irish backstop will be. And, of course, the Democratic Unionist Party said that they will support it as well. Seen as helpful, therefore, to the Prime Minister's cause. We will listen into the result.
Order!
The ayes to the right, 317. The noes to the left, 301.
The ayes to the right, 317. The noes to the left, 301. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. The question is the main motion as amended. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. On a point of order, the point of order of the Prime Minister.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, a fortnight ago, this House clearly rejected the proposed withdrawal agreement and political declaration, with just 202 members voting in favour. Tonight, a majority of honourable members have said they would support a deal with changes to the backstop. Combined with measures to address concerns over Parliament's role in the negotiation of the future relationship and commitments on workers' rights in law where need be, it is now clear that there is a route that can secure a substantial and sustainable majority in this House for leaving the EU with a deal. We will now take this mandate forward and seek to obtain legally binding changes to withdrawal agreement that deal with concerns on the backstop while guaranteeing no return to a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And my colleagues and I will talk to the EU about how we address the House's views. As I said this afternoon, there is limited appetite for such a change in the EU, and negotiating it will not be easy. But But in contrast to a fortnight ago, this House has made it clear what it needs to approve a withdrawal agreement. Many honourable members have said that the continuing protection of workers' rights after Brexit is something that needs to be strengthened. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business, will intensify our work with honourable members from across the House and the trade unions this week. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, will do the same on how we engage this House further in our approach to negotiating our future partnership with the EU. As well as making clear what changes it needs to approve the withdrawal agreement, the House has also reconfirmed its view that it does not want to leave the EU without a withdrawal agreement and future framework. I agree that we should not leave without a deal. However, simply opposing no deal is not enough to stop it. The government will now redouble its efforts to get a deal that this House can support. And to that end, I want to invite my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden, the honourable member for Birmingham Erdington, and all those that tabled amendments in opposition to no deal to discuss how we can deliver that by securing a deal. In light of the defeat of the Right Honourable Member, the Leader of the Opposition's amendment, I again invite him to take up my offer of the meeting to see if we can find a way forward. Mr. Speaker, if this House can come together, we can deliver the decision the British people took in June 2016, restore faith in our democracy, and get on with building a country that works for everyone. And as Prime Minister, I will work with members across the House to do just that.
Point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Because since we've had this debate and the House has emphatically voted to reject the no-deal option that the Prime Minister was supporting, could I say that we are prepared to meet her, to put forward the points of view from the Labour Party of the kind of agreement we want with the European Union to protect jobs, to protect living standards and to protect rights and conditions in this country. It's exactly the offer that was made last September, exactly the offer that was made 2 weeks ago, and I look forward to meeting the Prime Minister to set out those views to her on behalf of my party.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, this House has spoken very...
The Right Honourable Gentleman is the leader of the third party in this place, and he represents an important body of opinion. And as was exhorted earlier, people should treat opinions that differ from their own with respect. The Right Honourable Gentleman will be heard, however long it takes, and that's all there is to it. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House this evening has given an instruction to the government that no deal must be taken off the table. I am flabbergasted, frankly, that the Prime Minister still seems to be in denial. And I ask what measures the Prime Minister will bring forward, what legislation she will bring forward to make sure that we remove that threat of no deal from legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is a sad day where the Prime Minister has had to admit that her deal doesn't have the support and that she's prepared now to try and pick away at the backstop. We were told that the backstop was there to protect the peace process, but tonight the Conservative Party has effectively ripped apart the Good Friday Agreement. This House, Mr. Speaker, should be ashamed of itself. The contempt shown by the United Kingdom government right across these islands is stark. This government, Westminster and the Tory party has no respect for the devolved administration or for the other regions of the United Kingdom. Scotland has been silenced, sidelined and shafted by the Tories. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party has ripped apart the Good Friday Agreement, an international treaty. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is serious because we are talking about a treaty which has delivered peace to the island of Ireland. Mr. Speaker, what they have done is they've reneged on the backstop and reneged on the Good Friday Agreement. Mr. Speaker, can you advise what mechanisms are open to this House to protect the rights of democratic rights of the devolved regions and nations, the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process that this government are prepared to disregard.
Order. I will take the right honourable gentleman's question as a rhetorical question rather than a substantive question. He knows that Parliament is here to debate and to vote, and the right honourable gentleman is well familiar. I'm addressing the right honourable gentleman. Perhaps do me the courtesy of listening to me. He has the mechanisms of the House available to him. Yes, I will take other points of order briefly. Point of order, Sir Vincent Cable.
Now that the House has given the Prime Minister contradictory instructions to have no deal, but to pursue a course of action that will lead to no deal, will she return to the House tomorrow and give clearer indication about what these alternative arrangements actually are, which have been rejected at her own summit at Chequers, that now appear to be the basis of negotiation?
Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his point of order, but what I would say to him, and I know he'll take it in the right spirit, this is not Prime Minister's questions. Prime Minister's questions will take place tomorrow. I think if I understand correctly, the right honourable gentleman was more concerned to make his point than to elicit a reply from the Prime Minister, and there is no reason for the Prime Minister to feel any need to reply tonight. The right honourable gentleman has made his point. There will be ample opportunity for further exchanges, doubtless tomorrow and in many subsequent days. Yeah, I will come to the honourable lady, but point of order, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And can I just say, on behalf of, I know that we represent 10 seats in Northern Ireland, and the honourable lady behind me represents one, and there are others who represent a different point of view, but who refuse to take their seats in this House. But it is quite frankly outrageous, and I'm speaking on behalf, I believe, of both communities in Northern Ireland, to say that this vote tonight drives a coach and horses through the Good Friday Agreement. It does nothing of the sort. And it is utterly reckless to talk in those terms. Utterly reckless. Utterly reckless. The fact of the matter is that nobody in Northern Ireland, no political party, is advocating any kind of hard border in the island of Ireland. And we certainly do not advocate what others advocate, which is creating borders within the United Kingdom or ripping up the United Kingdom. Can I say, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, that this is a significant night because for the first time the House by a majority has expressed what deal, the sort of deal that will get through and will have a majority, and we will work with the Prime Minister to deliver the right deal for the United Kingdom.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his point of order. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
When the woman holding the title of Prime Minister is driven solely by the ideal of holding the Tory party together, and the man known as the leader of the opposition will neither lead nor oppose, how do you advise we get the House back to working for the communities we are supposed to represent?
Lots of points of order flooding in there from the leaders of the parties. Liz Saville-Roberts from Plaid Cymru. In reaction to this amendment that's just been voted on, support for the withdrawal agreement compared to 2 weeks ago when it was rejected by 230 votes. This, I should say, conditional support for the withdrawal agreement, a majority of 16 for the Prime Minister, as long as she seeks alternative arrangements from the European Union. What might they be? Well, perhaps Deputy Political Editor Beth Rigby can find out more. She's with the Transport Secretary. Beth.
Thanks, Dermot. Yes, I'm here with Mr Grayling, a Cabinet Secretary, the Transport Secretary and a Brexiteer. Mr Grayling, a bit of a different mood tonight from a couple of weeks ago when the Prime Minister lost the meaningful vote. You must be feeling quite relieved, aren't you?
I think that this is a good night. It's given, I think, the Prime Minister a clear mandate, a sense of direction to go back to Brussels and said, you've seen what our Parliament won't accept. Now you see that our Parliament is willing to do a deal, actually wants to do a deal, but it's got to be the right deal.
Just in terms of, if we go back to July and the Chequers deal, obviously many a Brexiteer was unhappy about her original plan on the backstop. It's been a bugbear really for many a Brexiteer for months and months and months. Why has it taken her so long to see the light, so to speak?
I think the Prime Minister's done what you would expect, that she's reached an agreement that she's happy with. She's come to Parliament. Parliament said, no, we don't like that aspect, the backstop particularly, and she's listened and said, well, I'll go back to Brussels and reopen the discussions. So that's what you would expect. A Prime Minister who's presented a plan to Parliament, been told, no, that's not right, and has listened and said, OK, I'm going to go back and have another go, and tonight has had the support of Parliament to do so.
So it looks quite good from here, but I've just had a statement from Mr Tusk's spokesperson, who has said we made it very clear at the December Council that the withdrawal agreement is not going to be reopened. So they're killing off the negotiation before it even starts. This is riding unicorns to Brussels, isn't it?
Well, let's see where we get to in the next few days. The reality is the European Union and its member states want an agreement. They don't want us to leave in a chaotic way, and so therefore I'm pretty confident that other member states will want to engage with the Prime Minister to find a solution to the issues. None of us want to see a hard border on the island of Ireland. None of us intend to see a hard border on the island of Ireland. We need to resolve how we make sure that doesn't happen.
I've just pulled the quote up now, just to quote it. This is from Mr Tusk's spokesperson. The backstop is part of the withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement is not open for renegotiation. The December European Council conclusions are very clear on this point. We're back at square one.